You click Buy. The money leaves your account. But what happens when the product never arrives, or the charge was completely unauthorized? The money doesn't just magically reappear. It triggers an invisible financial tug-of-war. Welcome to the long view, where we step back and master the big picture behind the systems that run our lives. Having spent years working behind the scenes in global banking, security operations, and fraud investigations, I've seen exactly what happens behind the curtain when trust breaks down. Today, we are cracking open the complete chargeback lifecycle to see how this system actually protects your money. Okay, so let's clear up the biggest misconception right out of the gate. Is a chargeback just a refund? I mean, it's incredibly easy to assume that when a bank reverses a charge, it's just a standard return policy in action, right? But as you'll see, mixing up the two is a really dangerous game, especially for anyone running a business. Think of a refund as a simple, voluntary exchange. The customer hands back the merchandise, the merchant hands back the original transaction amount, and everybody walks away relatively whole. A chargeback, though, that is a forced bank payment reversal. The merchant doesn't just lose the sale amount, they're on the hook for the cost of the item, the shipping and handling, the actual loss of the physical merchandise itself, and to top it all off, they get slapped with assorted punitive chargeback fees. It's a completely different beast. To truly understand this invisible tug-of-war, we're going to follow the exact journey a disputed dollar takes across 5 stages. 1. The anatomy of a chargeback. 2. The first strike, disputes. 3. The counterattack, representation. 4. Escalation, pre-arbitration. And 5. The final verdict, arbitration.
Section 1. Anatomy of a chargeback. The key players.
Before we start the clock on a dispute, we really need to know who's actually holding the power here. There are 2 critical banking institutions at the heart of this. First up is the issuer. That's the cardholder's bank, the one that literally issued the credit card to the consumer. In this tug-of-war, they act as the initial judge. On the flip side, we have the acquirer. That is the merchant's bank. They accept payments for the merchant and maintain their business account. So whenever a chargeback happens, it's basically a high-stakes conversation primarily between these 2 heavyweights. Section 2. The first strike, disputes. Initiating the invisible pull. This entire process is bound by incredibly strict, highly regulated timeframes. The cycle usually kicks off because a cardholder has up to 120 days from the transaction to dispute a charge. Once they pull that trigger, there might be a rapid 24 to 72-hour inquiry phase. But listen to this. Once the chargeback is officially filed, the merchant generally has only 20 to 45 days to respond. If they miss that window by even 1 single day, boom, they automatically forfeit the case. The clock is absolutely unforgiving. Let's walk through exactly how this first strike hits. Step 1, the cardholder disputes a charge. This could be for true fraud, like a stolen card, or a service issue, like receiving a defective item. Step 2, the customer's bank, the issuing bank, reviews the claim. If it looks valid, they don't wait around. Step 3, they issue a provisional credit to the customer. So you get your money back almost immediately. But to fund that credit, we hit Step 4. The issuing bank forcefully pulls those funds back from the merchant's bank, the acquirer. The merchant is then hit with a chargeback notice and those hefty fees we mentioned earlier. But the battle has just begun. Section 3. The counterattack. Representment. Fighting back with facts. Here is where it gets highly competitive. The merchant absolutely has the right to defend their revenue in a phase called representment. If they can prove the customer actually received the goods, they compile what banks call compelling evidence. We're talking hard data, copies of sales receipts, rock-solid tracking numbers and proof of delivery, AVS and CVV data from checkout, and customer communication logs. This is basically the bulletproof armor the merchant must quickly gather to prove the transaction was 100% legitimate. But just dumping a massive pile of receipts on a desk isn't going to cut it. Alongside all that evidence, merchants have to submit a rebuttal letter. This needs to be a concise, totally dispassionate summary that clearly organizes the facts. Why? Because the bank rep reviewing this case at the issuing bank literally only has a few minutes to spare per case. If your proof isn't clearly summarized right there on page 1 without any emotional rants, you lose. If the evidence is bulletproof, the issuing bank reverses the chargeback, the merchant gets their money back, and the customer's provisional credit gets revoked. Section 4. Escalation, pre-arbitration, the second chargeback. Okay, so when a dispute enters round 2, the jargon gets a bit confusing depending on the card network. Visa calls the second dispute pre-arbitration, while MasterCard goes with arbitration chargeback. Visa also splits its workflow into collaboration for complex manual reviews and allocation for automated rules-based fraud decisions. MasterCard generally sticks to a standard representment flow. But honestly, no matter what you call it, this phase just means the initial evidence wasn't quite enough to end the battle. Mapping out this progression really shows how fast things can escalate into dangerous territory. If the merchant challenges that second chargeback and the issuer still won't back down, they've hit a deadlock. The banks have completely failed to agree. So the merchant now has to make a highly calculated choice. Do they accept the loss and walk away, or do they push past this pre-arbitration phase right into the final, most perilous stage of the whole cycle? Which brings us to Section 5, the final verdict, arbitration, the Supreme Court of Credit. At this stage, the issuer and the acquirer actually step aside. The major card networks themselves, Visa or MasterCard, step in as the supreme neutral judge. But listen, this justice is definitely not free. $600. That is the staggering fee Visa charges the losing party in arbitration for the case ruling alone, and that's not even counting filing fees or non-compliance penalties. You are no longer just fighting for the cost of a disputed t-shirt or a software subscription. You are risking massive financial penalties if the network rules against you. Because of that massive risk, only a tiny fraction, literally about 2% of disputes, ever actually make it to arbitration, which just goes to show that most of these battles are won or lost much earlier in the life cycle, usually during that initial representment phase. Pushing a case all the way to arbitration, that is a high-stakes gamble reserved strictly for the most defensible, high-value, and perfectly documented transactions. If the card network reviews the evidence and sides with the cardholder, the consequences are incredibly severe. We're talking a binding decision with absolutely no appeal. You face punitive network fees in the hundreds or thousands of dollars, permanent revenue loss from the transaction itself, and you could potentially permanently damage your relationship with your payment processor. Looking at the big picture, the chargeback system isn't just a refund button. It is an intricate web of checks and balances designed to force accountability in a digital world where buyer and seller never even meet face-to-face. Understanding this life cycle means understanding exactly how your money is protected and the invisible systems fighting for it every single second. So I'll leave you with this. If the system is designed to force accountability, are you prepared to defend your money before the clock runs out? If you want to keep mastering the systems that run our world, hit subscribe. This is The Long View. See you next time.